What's up, everybody? Welcome back, episode 5. Before anything else, I just want to say we are 5 episodes in, and I am more grateful than I know how to express. When I started this, I committed to 180 episodes by December 31st, and I'm keeping that promise every single day. But what I could not have told you at the beginning was how much this would mean to me personally. Every episode has given me something, a release, a discovery, a conversation with myself that I did not know I needed to have. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for making this feel like something worth showing up for. That means everything. Now, today's episode, I need to tell you something that happened to me. And I want to be upfront. I'm not entirely sure if this was a dream or if it actually happened. The line between the two felt thin enough that I've been sitting with it, and I genuinely cannot say with certainty which side of it I was on. So I'm going to describe it as a dream, but I want you to hold that loosely as I tell it to you. In this dream, I woke up in my bed, and then I shut my eyes again. And with my eyes closed, I could still see something. The only way I can describe it is like a television turned on at about 20% brightness. Not nothing, not darkness, something. A low, present light behind my closed eyes. And then a voice, not a voice from outside, a voice from inside. My own conscious mind said to me, "This is what it looks like when your third eye starts opening." Then it went dark, and the voice said, "This is what it looks like with your third eye closed." And then for a moment, after a little moment, the light came back on, and it said, "And this is what it looks like opened." I woke up, or came fully back, whatever the right word is. And I just sat there because I did not fully know what the third eye even was at that point. I had heard the term, but I'd never researched it, never gone down that road. And yet, something in that dream or that experience or whatever it was showed me something and named it. I've been thinking about that ever since. And today, we're going to figure out what it means together. Let me start with the basics because I think the term gets thrown around in spiritual spaces a lot without people really unpacking what it actually refers to. The third eye is a concept that appears across extraordinary range of cultures, religion, and philosophical traditions. most of them with no historical connection to each other. In Hindu tradition, it is the Anja chakra. Ag- I probably pronounced that wrong. The sixth energy center, located in the middle of the forehead, between and slightly above eyebrows. It represents inner vision, intuition, and access to higher states of consciousness. In Buddhism, it is associated with enlightenment, the ability to see beyond the physical world into deeper spiritual realities. In ancient Egyptian iconography, it appears as the Eye of Horus, one of the most recognizable symbols in all of human history. And it was associated with protection, perception, and the ability to see what others could not. In Taoism and certain branches of Christianity, the Gospel of Luke references the eye being the lamp of the body, and scholars have debated whether this was a reference to inner sight. In Freemasonry, the all seeing eye sits at the top of the pyramid on the back of the American dollar bill. In ancient Mesopotamia, in the Aztec tradition, in shamanic cultures across South America and Africa, all of them independently pointing at the same thing, the concept of a third center of perception beyond the two physical eyes. That allows access to something the ordinary senses cannot reach, a kind of inner sight, an ability to perceive truth, energy, spiritual reality, the unseen fabric of the world underneath the visible one. And here's where it gets fascinating, because there's a physical structure inside your brain that many researchers and spiritual traditions believe is directly connected to the third eye. And it is real. It is in every anatomy textbook. It is called the pineal gland. The pineal gland is a tiny pine cone shaped structure setting roughly in the center of your brain. It's about the size of a grain of rice. And for a long time in mainstream science, it was treated as vestigial, a leftover from evolutionary history with no significant function, just sitting there, taking up space. We know that is not true. The pineal gland produces melatonin, the hormone that regulates your sleep cycle, your circadian rhythm, your body's sense of day and night. It is essentially your body's internal clock. It responds to light. When light hits your retinas, the signal travels to the pineal gland and it adjusts melatonin production accordingly. In the darkness, it produces more. In the light, it produces less. It is how your body knows when to sleep and when to wake. But here's where it gets more interesting. The philosopher Rene Descartes, one of the most important thinkers of history of Western philosophy, called the pineal gland the seat of the soul. Not metaphorically, he genuinely believed it was the point where the mind and the body connected, where consciousness interfaced with the physical brain. He wrote about this extensively in the 1600s. A lot of people dismissed it as philosophical speculation, but the question he was pointing at has not gone away. Because there's something else in the pineal gland that produces there's something in the pineal gland produces that science has only started to examine seriously. And that something is DMT, dimethyltryptamine. DMT. It is a classified as a psychedelic drug. It occurs naturally in many plants, and it also occurs naturally in the human brain. Produced, research suggests, by the pineal gland. DMT produces what researchers and people who have experienced it describe as the most intense altered state of consciousness possible. People who have taken it in clinical research settings in traditional ceremonial context, in the Amazon, where it's been used in plant medicine called ayahuasca for thousands of years, consistently report experiences that go far beyond what you would expect from a chemical reaction in the brain. They report encountering other intelligences, beings, entities that feel more real than anything in waking life. They report being shown things, truths about the nature of reality, about existence, about what happens after death. They report a sensation of seeing through the veil of ordinary perception into something underneath it that is more fundamental, more true. And the experience is not random. The consistency of what people report across cultures, across backgrounds, across the entire history of its use is striking in the same way the cross cultural consistency of sleep paralysis figures is striking. Because people who have never met each other, who have no way to compare notes, describe the same beings, the same places, the same revelation. Rick Strassman, a psychiatrist who constructed the first federally approved clinical research on DMT in the 1990s, wrote a book called The Spiritual Molecule, documenting his findings. He went in as a scientist and came out with questions he did not expect to be asking. Because what his research subjects described did not fit neatly into a neurological explanation. It pointed at something his scientific training had not given him the language for. Now, here's where the pineal gland and the third eye converge in a way I cannot dismiss. The pineal gland produces DMT. The pineal gland responds to light and darkness. It is literally a light sensitive organ inside your brain. Ancient traditions across the world independently identified the center of the forehead, directly aligned with where the pineal gland sits inside the skull, as the seat of inner vision and higher perception. DMT produces experiences that people across all of human history have described as seeing beyond the ordinary world into something more real. That's not nothing. That's a lot of independent arrows pointing in the same direction. Okay, here is where the conversation gets a little darker. And I want to present this as a theory, something worth knowing about, worth thinking about, not something I am telling you is definitively true. There is a widespread belief in spiritual and conspiracy communities that the pineal gland in most modern humans is calcified, hardened, shut down, not functioning the way it was designed to function. And that this calcification is not entirely natural. Fluoride accumulates in the pineal gland at a higher concentrations than anywhere else in the body. This is documented science. It is not disputed. The pineal gland absorbs and stores fluoride, and fluoride calcifies it, hardens the tissue, and reduces its function. Fluoride has been added to public drinking water in the United States since the 1940s. The official reason is dental health. Fluoride strengthens both tooth enamel and reduces cavities. And that benefit is real. That part is not in dispute. But the question the theory asks is this: did anyone consider, or does anyone consider, what fluoride accumulation in the pineal gland does to human consciousness, to intuition, to whatever connection the pineal gland provides to something beyond ordinary perception? What was that a side effect? What if that was a side effect that nobody thought of? Or was it a feature? I'm not going to tell you there's a coordinated effort to suppress human consciousness through the water supply. I do not know that. But I will tell you that the question is worth sitting with, because if the pineal gland is the physical anchor to the third eye, if it's the biological mechanism through which humans access something beyond ordinary perception, then anything that systematically reduces its function is worth paying attention to. Ancient traditions talk about practices to decalcify and activate the pineal gland: fasting, meditation, spending time in complete darkness, certain foods, reducing fluoride intake. Whether these practices work in the way they claimed, whether they can literally reactivate a calcified pineal gland, I do not know. But the intention behind them is clear. They are about clearing the mechanism so the signal can get through. Let me bring this back to something more personal and practical, because I think the third eye gets talked about in ways that feel abstract and mystical and inaccessible to most people. So let me try to ground it. Opening your third eye in the most practical sense is about developing a form of perception that goes beyond what your five senses can give you. It is about intuition, about that feeling you get in your gut before your brain has the time to process the information, about walking into a room and sensing something before anyone has said a word, about knowing something is wrong before the evidence arrives, about dreaming something and then watching it happen. We talked about intuition in episode 2 when we discussed whether I have intuitive abilities and what experiences have led to that. This is the same conversation from a different angle. The third eye is essentially the spiritual framework for what intuition actually is. It's the idea that human beings have a capacity for perception beyond physical senses. And that this capacity is not supernatural in the sense of being impossible. It is natural. It is built in. It has just been quieted. Think about the moments in your life when you knew something you had no logical reason to know. When you felt a presence before you could explain it. When a thought came to you fully formed from somewhere you cannot identify. When a dream showed you something that later turned out to be real. That is the third eye, not a mystical concept, as lived experience. And here's the connection that ties this entire episode to everything we've been building across the whole podcast. In episode 2, we talked about neurodivergence, about brains that are wired differently, that process the world in ways that do not fit the standard template. What if some of what gets labeled as neurodivergent, the heightened sensitivity, the pattern recognition that fires faster than it should, the ability to feel the emotional temperature of the room before any words are spoken, the awareness of things other people seem to not notice? What if some of that is actually the third eye functioning at a higher level than average? What if the brains that the world has spent decades trying to medicate into compliance are not broken? What if they are more open than standard? I do not know the answer to that, but I think it's one of the most interesting questions this topic raises. I want to come back to where we started, because I've spent this whole episode building a framework, and I want to put my experience inside it now. In that dream or experience or whatever it was, something showed me the difference between my third eye being open and closed. It used light and darkness, 20% brightness versus nothing, open versus shut. What strikes me now, having gone through everything we just covered, is how specific that image was. Not a dramatic vision, not a blinding light, 20% brightness. Like something just beginning to come on. Like a dimmer switch that had been turned down almost all the way and was just starting to come up. I've not researched any of this before that experience. I did not know about the pineal gland. I did not know about the light sensitivity of the third eye. I did not have a framework for any of it. And yet, something in me, something that knew more than I consciously knew, showed me exactly what the literature describes: the closed eye as darkness, the opening as light returning, the opened eye as something present, something illuminated, something that was there all along waiting to be turned back on. I'm not going to claim I know what that means. I'm not going to tell you my third eye is open or that I have abilities I cannot explain. What I'm going to tell you is whatever that experience was, it pushed me towards a conversation I needed to have. And this episode is that conversation. 5 episodes. We are 5 episodes into something that I am more proud of every single day. What I love most about where this podcast is going, and I want to say this clearly because I think it matters, is that underneath every topic we have covered, there's one question running through all of it. Who are you really? Not the version of you that was labeled and categorized and told how to fit. Not the version that was medicated or dismissed or misunderstood. The version underneath all of that. The version that wakes up between sleep and waking and sees things. The version that feels presences in the room. The version that has experiences it cannot explain and has been too afraid to say out loud. That is what I love about this podcast. That is who this podcast is for. That is who it has always been for. If today's episode opened something for you, if it gave you a word or framework for something you've been experiencing and did not have the language for, I'm really glad. That is why we are here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for 5 episodes. Thank you for being on this ride. New episode tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. I will talk to you then. As always, stay you, be you, and do